My name is Paul Brandt, and I'm a country music singer, songwriter, and recording artist, and I'd like to talk to you about respectful disruption. I'm not an expert on business, fashion, politics, strategy, or culture. I'm just a guy who's had some cool experiences, and I'm here to tell you about what I've learned, and I also love stories. Disruption has shaken me up over and again on both the business and social front. What I want to propose today is that the way one handles business and social disruption takes finesse if the goal is to create something that the world needs, especially in the social arena. In 1997, the winds of change began to blow in the music industry. Warning signs had been rumbling, and as a young, tech-savvy musician, I had a feeling the effects were going to be massive. I recall a conversation I had with the then president of Reprise Records in Nashville, and I asked him what his digital strategy was with the MP3 on the way. "The MP3 is a passing fad," he said. "It's like the CB radio. Here today and gone tomorrow. Some people just don't get it. Change is always coming, and you can lead, follow, or get run over. The ability to pivot has become one of the most important skills of the modern era." Today, 21 years later, he is out of a job and almost correct. The MP3 and its disruptive effects are still very much in play, but we barely talk about it because it's simply become a cog in the wheel of the most monumental change any industry has ever seen. The good news is that the transcendent connection, healing, and escape provided by music are a constant. Music will always find a way, but the world of music today is a bit like a beehive right after it's been kicked. Ultimately, it was probably a good thing. It shook things up momentarily, giving control back to creators, and made music more accessible than it had ever been in history. Premium music providers were undermined, and consumers who had been gouged for years suddenly had the upper hand. Music is slowly migrating back to being controlled by industry, but opportunity abounds for the brave. It truly is the Wild West. That was business. Let's move to values. 14 years ago, I was on a dusty street in the Southeast Asian district of Svepak in Cambodia. Gang activity was rampant, and it was notorious for organized crime activity. During the day, children were being drugged and kept in a warehouse across the street from a new construction project. During the evening, they were systematically drugged once again and sent off to work as slaves. Those whose little bodies inevitably wore out and had died were buried behind a new build with no grave marker, ceremony, or remembrance. The facility being built was to be as modern and efficient as possible. Funded by a California-based businessman, it was to be a sex destination hotel to exploit children as young as 5 years old, catering to international clientele. A group of us had gathered to support an organization that was trying to disrupt this activity. We made the businessman funding the project nervous, and he put the nearly completed building on the market as his ability to turn a good profit was being challenged. So we bought it, and we turned it into a school, clinic, and church. And we watched as over the next 4 years, the entire community changed. Former mass graves and playgrounds became playgrounds, pride of ownership and safety increased, and a healthy community began to flourish. Although a disruptive innovation in business occurred, humans were freed from being enslaved to being free to pursue their own choices. In this small community, the overarching disruption was a disruption in values. We drew a line in the sand and stood up for the value and sanctity of human life. And it got me thinking, should this newfound peace, safety, and tranquility now be challenged once again? Now that it's working, maybe we should disrupt it. What it led me to is this. I'm a songwriter, and to create anything novel, I must shut off the critic in my head and test boundaries, get messy. You have to ask the tough questions, shake up the status quo. As a good friend of mine in Nashville likes to say, you have to dare to suck. Disruption inevitably makes things messy, but I believe indiscriminate disruption for the simple sake of disruption can be a dangerous thing, especially when it comes to the concept of social innovation. As a famous redneck once said in his last words, "Hey y'all, watch this." We shouldn't be afraid to break things so that we can make them better, but we must soberly consider whether the disruption we're about to embark upon is something that the world needs. This, of course, is subjective, but before we begin freeing Pandora, I believe it's critical for us to ask if our disruption will encourage freedom, not only for one, but for all. Disruption which infringes upon the freedom of another will always devolve into destruction. My favorite project to spring out of my recent role as storyteller in residence at Mount Royal University's Business and Marketing School is the anti-human trafficking awareness movement called Not in My City. By striving for better and allowing the needs of victims and survivors to drive our activities, we're seeing a shift which we believe will be of benefit to our entire society by making everyone more free, and we're gaining momentum. I hope you'll check out what we're doing and join us at notinmycity.ca. And yet, there's resistance. Who are you to be the morality police? Do you really think you'll affect change in this? There are people who choose this life. Before music, I was a registered nurse at the Alberta Children's Hospital, and a well-known adage in the medical profession is do no harm. And yet, to make change, you gotta blow some stuff up. And so the tension remains. We must shake things up to make things new and improve the future, and yet our best teacher is often history and the past. Disruptive innovation of values should be undertaken with extreme caution. Values are not businesses to be innovated, improved, toppled, and discarded. They are either based on truth or they are not. Truth cannot be disrupted. Truth simply is. And yet free will allows us to decide what we will do with truth. Free will and one's right to continue on a chosen path is sacred. It must be upheld. We should all have the opportunity to choose. But who ultimately pays for those choices? And what about personal responsibility? In an accepting, inclusive society, who gets to decide what's right and what's wrong, what's better and what's best? If one person's truth comes at the expense of another's, as it inevitably will, what do we do with that? What's the standard? Indiscriminate disruption for the sake of disruption is ill-advised. Choosing not to look both ways before crossing the street feels novel and revolutionary, right up until the bus disrupts your day. There are laws which disruptive thinking can help us to understand, just as there are certain realities disruptive thinking will never change. And one of those realities is that people are precious. Disrupt but do no harm seems to be a good policy to me. Striving to be at peace with one another whenever possible and employing courtesy are underrated, underused skills today. A respectfully disruptive path will be our only chance for a civil and functional society. Thank you.